17 hours later, Mimi and I were in the Palstel lobby of the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York City. We had taken a ride to Buffalo with Aunt Lily and her new automobile, the Crankmobile, of which she was very proud. Mimi misled her to think that we were going with Mother's blessing. Mother was in the midst of another heartfelt letter to W.T. Steed, and paid no notice to anything else when she was involved with such correspondence. We wrote her a hasty note, then we left on the front porch table, assuming we'd be fine. We slept the whole trip down, so we weren't feeling too tired when we arrived. Even if we had stayed awake the entire time, we were so high-strung with excitement that we'd barely noticed the fatigue. We encamped on the two of the velvet upholstered chairs at the Waldorf Astoria hotel lobby. We had decided that Tesla had come down at some point to eat. We would contact with him when he did. I didn't exactly mind waiting there. Fascinated as I was by the Grand Hotel, the lobby couches and the square chairs were exquisitely rich and vibrant in color. Their walnut wood arms and backs gleamed with high polish set off by their gold details. The elaborate wooden moldings around the ceiling were illuminated by the glowing white globes of chandeliers set in a low row. A mixture of cinnamon and rose petal fragrances infused every inch of the lobby. An hour passed quickly as Mimi and I globbed at the parade of high-fashion guests who passed by dressed in the latest styles. Not far off, the desk manager stared steely, suspicious glances in our direction. My stomach growled. We'd eaten cheese sandwiches on the train, but it was getting close to lunchtime. I don't think they'd let us eat here, but maybe I could sneak a snack in, Mimi proposed. You watch for Tesla, I'll go see what I can find. I was once again observing the dazzling Rich saunter through the marketing each page to make sure Tesla didn't slip past unnoticed when a young man rushed by. I guessed him to be in his late teens, maybe early 20s. He caught my attention because, well, to be absolutely honest, it was because he was so good looking. He had short, sort of tousled light brown hair and a slim, athletic build. His pants were gray and his summer jacket was light blue. Although he was neat, his attire did not bespeak the kind of wealth of this trifled the place. He hurried onto the front desk, and his words put me on full alert. "Could you tell Mr. Tesla that Thad is on his way up?" he requested. Instantly, I was on my feet, frantically wondering what Sherlock Holmes would do in such a moment as this. Follow him, of course. It was difficult to hang back inconspicuously, as Holmes would have done, since Thad was heading for one of the elevators. If I let him get on and go up without me, I have conducted the briefest tale in history of all detective work. So I picked up my pace and scooted into the car alongside him, as the white-gloved elevator operator closed the great door. "Floor?" the operator inquired. Looking first to me, my mind raced. I had no idea what to reply. Then it came to me. "Top floor, please," I said, trying to sound confident. If I went all the way to the top, I could claim that I had changed my mind and jumped off when Thad got out. The operator nodded and looked at Thad. "Mr. Tesla's room?" he inquired. "Thank you, Charles," Thad replied. As we began to move, I turned my attention to Thad. I gazed up at the set of vivid blue beneath the forehead that bore the faded white scar. It gave just the right note of character to a face that might have been blandly handsome otherwise. He nodded and smiled slightly. "Hello." "Hello," I said, relieved that he had spoken first, since it would have been seemingly for me to start speaking to him. For a moment of silence passed between us, during which I felt consumed by panic and had no clue what to do next. Do what Holmes would do, observe something. I thought, "That looks heavy. What's in your package?" I asked, noticing he clutched to his chest a parcel wrapped in brown paper. He laughed lightly. "If I told you, you wouldn't believe me." "Let me guess," I ventured. "Will it light all of Manhattan?" His smile faded, and he looked startled suspicion. "No." "Will it contact alien life from another planet?" Thad tightened his grip on the parcel, as though fearing I might snatch it away from him. His eyes darted nervously to the light on the ascending elevator, no doubt checking to see how long it would be until he escaped me. "No," he replied. It's in an earthquake machine, I persisted. Charles, forgive me, but I think I'll get out here on the 5th floor, Dad said abruptly. As you wish, Charles complied. The elevator door slipped open and Tad stepped out quickly. I changed my mind too, I said, and the doors closed once more. Please let me out on the next floor. Charles hid whatever annoyance he must have felt beneath the mask of polite professionalism. Very well. On the 6th floor I hurried out, my eyes darting frantically around quite elegant hallways to search for stairs, to take me back down to the 5th floor. If I was fast enough I could continue following Thad, though now that he was onto me, I would have to hang back even more than before. This wouldn't be easy, but I was determined to find Tesla. At the end of the hallway was a stairway, and I ran to it. I was only a few steps down when I came face to face with Thad, who was running up. Who are you anyway? He asked. Jane Onelia Taylor. Mind telling me how you know so much about my parcel? Talking fast, I told him everything, starting with the day back in 1898, when we were caught in the Tesla-induced quake, and continuing with how I'd avidly followed Tesla's career. I finished up by telling him about the Suns contest, and what better person to write than someone I've been researching all my life. So if I could only meet him and get a quick interview, do you think you could get me in to see him? I don't think Sherlock Holmes would have been impressed with my approach, so completely lacking in subtlety and cleverness. Just the same, Thad was much more relaxed once he heard my story. An aspiring journalist, huh? He said, seeming impressed, as he leaned against the banister to look over me. You sure picked a great guy to write about. Tesla's the smartest guy alive. Even brainier than Edison, if you ask me. Can you get me in to see him? I pressed. Maybe, he said. Come back here in an hour. I'll meet you. Can't you just tell me what room he's in? I asked. He shook his head, still studying me, as though he hadn't yet decided if I could be trusted. No, if he says it's all right, I'll come back and take you to him. He continued on up the steps and went with him. He stopped at the top step and faced me. You can't keep following me, he said. Is it wonderful to be his assistant? I asked. He shrugged. He's a weird guy, brilliant, but sort of nuts. In what ways? I asked, a little disturbed at this. He grinned mischievously. You'll find out. He turned to leave, but I found it hard to let him go. He never told me what was in the parcel, I reminded him. He glanced at it, and then back at me. You're right, I didn't. In exactly 1 hour, Mimi and I standing by the stairs on the 6th floor waiting for Thad. He's not coming, I fretted. He'll be here, Mimi insisted optimistically. But I noticed that she was twirling a curl on the neck that had fallen from her thick, unswept hair. Just as I was despairing of Thad's ever arriving, the elevator door opened and he stepped out. He spied us and with a quick wave of acknowledgement and headed our way. He's handsome, isn't he? I quickly whispered to Mimi. With a sly smile, she pinched my waist. Jane's in love. I pinched her back. No. In the next moment, Thad was standing in front of us. I introduced Mimi and then asked a burning question. Will he see us? Yes, I'll bring you to him, but you can't say a word until his meeting is over. At the same time, Mimi and I both put our index fingers to our lips and gestured of assured silence. Come on, Thad said, waving for us to follow him. We went into the elevator and Thad directed the operator, no longer Charles, to take us to the private floor. Mimi and I exchanged darting, thrilled glances. The private floor. We got out on the very top of the Waldorf Astoria. There were many fewer doors, only about 4, than in the hallway of the lower floors. The ceiling was easily 3 times the height. I clutched Mimi's wrist as we followed Thad down the furthest of the doors. Is this where Tesla lives? I whispered to Thad. Thad shook his head. Astor's guest suite. He uses it for meetings, he answered quietly. My heart bounced with excitement the moment I spied Tesla sitting at the end of the long dining room table in this spectacularly lavish suite. The 2-story tall windows beside the table framed Tesla in a field of bluey sky and made him seem to be sitting on some heavenly realm. After so many years of seeing him frozen in newspaper photos, it hardly seemed possible that he was real, moving, living person. But there he was. Tesla was deep in quiet conversation with an elegantly dressed middle-aged man in a suit. The man's hair and beard were closely cropped. Frameless Prisnitz glasses were popped on his straight nose, attached with a black silk cord. "That's George Bolt," Thad whispered to us. "He runs the place for the Astors." We couldn't hear the low-pitched conversation, but I deduced it wasn't going well from the head-shaking going on. After another tense exchange, Tesla rose abruptly and headed straight for us. My mind went blank. This was the moment I've waited many years for, and I hadn't prepared anything to say. What had I been thinking, or not thinking? Stood there smiling eagerly like an empty-headed fool, but Tesla didn't seem to even notice Mimi or me. Instead, he spoke only to Thad. "I'm having one of my flashes," he'd stated in a dull, lifeless voice. Not at all the animated man I'd remember from so long ago. At that, he returned to his suite. "What was he talking about?" Mimi asked Thad. "He gets these flashes where everything kind of overloads. He feels like he hears smells and sees sounds," Thad explained, keeping one eye on Tesla as he disappeared into one of the bedrooms. "This day has probably been very stressful for him. Astor was supposed to be here to talk to him, but he hasn't shown up yet." "Will he be all right?" I asked. Thad nodded. "He'll lie down in one of the guest rooms until the flashes pass. When they're over, he's most likely he'll have a brilliant idea." "How long do these usually take?" I asked. "As long as it takes," Thad said with a shrug. "Hours, days, months?" I pressed him for some kind of parameter. "Should we return home and come back in 2 years?" "He usually knocked out for 2 or 4 hours, Thad estimated, which is a bit more helpful." Someone rapped on the door and Thad opened it. And somewhat heavy-set man in his late 30s with black, slicked-back hair entered. Behind him was a much younger woman, with curly brown hair swept up onto her head. She was slim and beautiful. Her dress was a floor crepe de Chirone, adorned with black lace collar, and climbed up her neck all the way to her face. She wore rouge and red lipstick. I guess she was about 25. The man strode past us and went directly to Mr. Bolt, who still sat at the table. "Mr. Gunningham," Bolt greeted him with a heavy German accent, surprised to see him. Gunningham, it had to be Benjamin Gunningham, one of the richest men in New York, if not the world. I had seen his picture in many papers, and now he was here, in the same room as me. I'm glad Mimi was there, because there was no way Emily, or Bryce would have believed it without a witness. "What's this? I have arrived to find my suite in use," Mr. Gunningham said. "Aren't I Jack's favorite guest?" "We weren't expecting you," Mr. Bolt explained. "Does that make a difference?" Jack said I could always count on having this room. "But Jack, does he mean Jacob Astor?" I whispered to Thad. "John Jacob Astor the Fourth," Thad replied with a nod. "He owns the place." "I know," I whispered, remembering the newspaper article I read. "Why is the person so important that he got my suite?" Benjamin Gunningham demands. "Mr. Tesla has some business to discuss with Mr. Astor. I thought this suite was available. Regrettably, Colonel Astor has been delayed in Rhode Island." Gunningham snickered, as if he knew some sort of secret about John Jacob Astor that was too embarrassing to mention. "I'll bet he's been delayed. Say no more. Tell this Tesla that Benjamin Gunningham has arrived and he has to clear out." "I'm afraid Mr. Tesla is presently feeling ill and lying down. He has his own apartment in the hotel, but I'm reluctant to disturb him in his current state." "Oh, I know who you mean now. Weird Tesla. The nutty inventor pal of Jack's." Mr. Gunningham threw an unhappy glance towards the closed bedroom door. For a moment I thought he would storm in and pull Tesla out. Bristled, disliking Gunningham instantly. How dare he call Tesla names? "May I offer you Colonel Astor's suite down the hall? He is apparently remaining in Newport this night and will not be using it," Mr. Bolt suggested in a conciliatory tone. "I wish Jack would insist on being called Colonel Astor," Mr. Gunningham cried. "It's so ridiculous. He donated his yacht and bought himself a beguile of volunteers just so he could have his own luxurious title. It's absurd. Colonel Astor served his country with distinction during the Spanish-American War," Mr. Bolt insisted loyally. "Shall I prepare his suite for you?" Very well, I suppose, Mr. Cunningham agreed grudgingly. I think Jack's suite is bigger than this one anyways. Somewhat larger, yes, Mr. Bold agreed. Then I turned to check on what Mimi was making of the fall desk. I discovered she stepped out into the hall with the young woman who had come in, with Mr. Cunningham. She was showing Mimi the lacework of her underslip of her dress. They were laughing and appeared to be getting along quite well, amazingly well, I thought, for two people who had only just met. Then they noticed me watching. They came back into the room. Benjamin, Mom, Cherie, the young woman said with Mr. Cunningham in a charming French accent when he returned to the front door. Can we invite these lovely late people to our suite to have a bite to eat? The trip here has been très dull, and I would love to be amused. I am tired and I want to unpack, Natalie, he grumbled. Natalie pouted prettily. You sound like an old man, she complained. Her barb must have hit the mark because Benjamin Cunningham relieved and invited Mimi, Thad, and me to the suite of John Jacob Astor IV. I caught Mimi's eyes and opened my mouth just enough to express my total disbelief. She stifled a grin and nodded. She felt the same as I did. Could this really be happening?